I think we're gonna get started because we've got a full hour and a half and we'll let folks filter in. Um, and I can go through my introduction. My name's Rhiannon Wright. I am a program manager at CADE, and tonight is our very first webinar of 2025. So thanks everyone for joining us. Tonight we have Sarah Ficken of New Moon Farmstead to talk about everyone's favorite topic of grants. So let's start with our land acknowledgement. CADE's offices are located in Oneonta, New York, near the headwaters of the Susquehanna River. These lands have been tended to for thousands of years by the people of the Mohawk and Oneida nations, who are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The name Oneonta is original to the Mohawk language and means place of open rocks, which if you have been to Oneonta and you've ever done like the Table Rock hiking trail or anything, that's where that name comes from. The government of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is the oldest continuous democracy on Earth. There are lots of ways to honor their legacy and support their continued existence on the land. You can learn about the history of how the land was stolen. You can buy seeds from companies that pay royalties to tribal nations for heritage seeds. You can support mutual aid and grassroots organizing. We've got a couple of links up on the screen that are good opportunities for learning. One that's close to us in Schoharie County here is the Waterfall Unity Alliance. They are doing continuous fundraising for their 60-acre community farm that they purchased a couple of years ago now here in Schoharie County. So yeah, their website is up and the tribal government websites are up there. And if you don't know whose land you're on, there's a website, native-land.ca, where you can learn. Would love to see where everyone's calling in from tonight. So if you want to throw your name and where you're at and your farm name in the chat, we'd love to see that. Okay, about CADE now. I'm sure you all have some familiarity being that you are here. But for a little bit more background, we are a nonprofit. We're established in 1991 in Oneonta. We provide free education, one-on-one support, and networking for farms and food businesses across New York State. We offer services across topics that are relevant to ag businesses, but they're really mostly rooted in business planning. We want to help folks who get into farming from a place of passion and values to understand how to be thoughtful about their business model, their management practices, and their financial stuff. It's also worth mentioning that we greatly appreciate your participation in our surveys. We'll be sending a post-workshop survey in the chat later tonight. The vast majority of our funding comes from grants. Tonight's programming is supported by USDA and New York State programs, so your responses help us to report back to those funders and keep our services free for all. We also really look to these evaluations to make actual improvements to our programming, so your honest feedback really is important to us. And if you're inspired by our work, you can head to our website to make a tax-deductible donation. I want to talk really quickly specifically about a program that we have open right now, the Beginning Farmer Boost program. This is a competitive technical assistance package that has a mix of services, including a stipend to work with a graphic designer on logo or brand kit, or something along those lines, access to the farmer's office, which is a whole suite of financial planning courses, lifetime access to all of those courses, a membership to the National Young Farmers Coalition, and a gift card to an ag publisher of your choosing. So it is a competitive, application process. You can see what the application looks like on our website, and you can reach out to James or I if you have any questions about that. The application is due February 9th, and I think a lot of what Sarah is going to talk about tonight is kind of relevant to how to go about writing the content for that application. It's really not a long process to apply. It's some informational pieces about your farm and where your business is at, and then a couple of open-ended questions asking about your goals for the year. one thing I didn't say, this is specifically for beginning farmers. I mean, it's in the title, but beginning farmer, as per the USDA's definition, is a farm within the first 10 years of operation. So if you have any questions about the eligibility or scoring criteria for this program, there is a full Google Doc linked on that webpage that really takes you through every step of the eligibility and the scoring, how we're scoring those applications. Okay, moving on to our community agreements. We really want to be holding space for a positive learning environment tonight that's centered around curiosity and kindness. A lot of the content from our community agreements was written for more intimate events like long-term courses or in-person workshops. But this is a good time for us to point out some Zoom housekeeping things as well. So if you can please keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question, it would help us with background noise. I'm not sure that everybody is muted when they come into the Zoom session. So make sure that you're on mute. And you are welcome to have your cameras on or off. We are recording this webinar for later distribution with anybody who can't make it tonight, or if you have to hop off early, do know that we will share the recording. We're going to save hopefully 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. James and I will be monitoring the chat, and if there's anything that's super relevant to something that Sarah's talking about in the moment, we can stop her. But if there's a more general question, we'll save that for the end. And closed captions are also available through Zoom. If you click in the bottom toolbar, for me, I have to click on the 3 dots, and you can navigate to captions. So if you're doing something else, making dinner, chasing kids around, captions can be helpful to still be somewhat present. Accessibility really is important to us. So if there's anything that we can do to improve our community agreements or the way that we make our programming accessible, you can please share that in the workshop evaluation. Okay, that's my intro. So tonight we're talking about a farmer's perspective on grants. We know that there's lots of good resources and recordings available for farmers to understand what the landscape of grants is. You can hear directly from the mouth of USDA representatives, from FSA agents, about what their programs are offering, but there's really nothing like hearing it directly from a farmer. So if you need resources related to, what is the nitty-gritty of the exact eligibility program of programs, that's not really what we're going to be going in today, but there are great resources for you available. This is going to be more of a overview about what are the things that you need to be considering from the ideation through the execution of a grant. So tonight we have Sarah Ficken to introduce her. Sarah farms alongside her husband and 3 children on their first generation diversified farm in Munnsville, New York. She has a bachelor's degree from Cornell and a master's from Washington State University. In 2015, she was successful in securing funding for a heifer facility and a new cow barn through the first round of beginning farmer funding, and has been applying for grants for the farm in a professional capacity ever since. In her free time, she enjoys embroidering slightly irreverent pillowcases and listening to audiobooks. So over to you, Sarah. Thanks everyone for listening to me yak.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So thank you all for coming today. I'm super excited to talk to you about grants and what our experiences have been. I love talking to groups that are interactive. So if you have questions, feel free to flag me down in the chat. I can't actually see the chat. I can only see my presentation. But James or Rhiannon can flag me down if you have a question. We typically always learn best when we have conversations. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we've learned on our farm as we've gone about applying for grants and getting some successfully and not getting some. But before I get started, I just wanted to share a little bit with you about our farm. We are a first generation diversified dairy farm. We started farming together in 2012, and we purchased the property that we're on at the end of 2012. Being a first generation farm really gave us the opportunity to do things our way. We had to be really scrappy to start with. We also were able to think really creatively because there wasn't a older generation or any preconceived notions going in. We've always been a very values driven farm. When we were sitting in our tiny basement apartment in college and building the business plan that eventually became what our business now is, we really wanted to center sustainability, both environmental sustainability, but also social and financial sustainability. So for us, that environmental sustainability, that's looked like we've been climate neutral since about 2016. For social sustainability, we've tried really hard to be good members of our community. We've always paid a living wage and we've always paid overtime. And then financial sustainability has meant that we've made business decisions that have allowed us to be profitable while also being true to our other values. So how did I get into grants? Um, it's a very long story, but basically, I started working for Colgate in the office of fellowships and scholarships about 12 years ago, helping college students apply for things like Fulbright fellowships or like Rhodes scholarships, those types of things. And the dean that I was working for at the time was really engaged with our farm and really interested in helping us. And so when the beginning farmer grant came out, that first round of funding in 2015, the woman I was working for was like, you should apply for this and I will help you every step of the way. And so we applied. I had I'd just given birth to Hannah. She was like this tiny little newborn. I think on the day I turned in my application, she was maybe 4 weeks old. And so the entire process I was doing with like a tiny little baby. And my boss at the time, like she helped me through it all and we got the grant. It was transformational for our farm. And since then, I've been applying to grants as they make sense for our farm. And then in my professional life, I moved on from Colgate and have worked in various roles, either writing, administering, or managing grants now for almost a decade. So today what we're going to talk about is how on our farm, how we go about sort of the grant application process, how we go about finding fundable projects and the grants that fit. We will talk about what happens once we get an award letter and how we assess the quality of fit for that program. And then I'll also talk a little bit about project management and what we do to stay organized. We all know how busy farming is, and a lot of time administrativia can really take a backseat. But when you're working with fairly large awards, it's important to stay on top of things. So before we begin, I know you've all already dropped where you're from in the chat, but if you'd also like to drop what you hope to learn in the chat, that way, well, I can't see the chat right now. When I get done speaking, if we haven't covered it, I'll make sure that we can go back and talk about it. And before we really begin, I do want to take a minute to acknowledge that the world is in a really uncertain place right now. We've probably all gotten the notifications on our phones over the last couple days about different executive orders that have affected different funding streams, as well as memos seeking to clarify those executive orders and like judicial injunctions pausing those executive orders. We don't know what the future holds right now, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to stick all of that in a box and say the world will do what it does. And a lot of the lessons that we've learned are broadly applicable, whether you're going after federal funding or you're going after private foundation money or research funds. So hopefully we'll get more clarity within the next week or so. around what federal grants will be doing. But at least for now, hopefully this information can be useful. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the grant application process. The thing that I love about grants, more than, I mean, the award at the end is really nice. But the thing that I love about the grant writing process more than anything is that it's really an opportunity to both dream and then to put bounds on your dream and figure out how you're going to get there. This quote from Henry David Thoreau was the quote that I put in my high school yearbook. But really, it just rings so true. Like, you need to dream in order to do, and you need to do in order to dream.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
I think your screen's not shared with the group here.
Oh,
Sorry to cut you off.
no, that's good.
Oh,
I
you
can see it.
You
I can see it.
Okay, it's hidden for me. Okay, sorry. I'll figure it out on my end.
Is it
Sorry,
James?
guys.
You're good.
Continue with the
Are
program.
most people seeing some cows laying down on a composted bedded pack barn right now?
Yes.
Yes.
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. It's like, wow, you guys have been really good for just listening to me speak. Okay, so once we get into thinking about grants, and honestly, we do this outside of the grant process as well. We try to think about identifying fundable projects. And so for us, this looks like setting big goals for our farm and then breaking it out into chunks. So if you go back to the sketchiest basement apartment that we lived in college, it was so sketchy. When we were sitting around the dining room table trying to figure out what it was, how did we get to be a dairy farm? Or how would we get to be a dairy farm? Really dreaming big became really important. I like to joke that the second most valuable thing we owned when we applied for a loan for this farm was our toaster oven. But it's not really a joke. Like, we had our college degrees and a desire to milk cows. And we were able to leverage that into a dairy. And so I think the opportunity to dream big is really, really important because it allows you to know what it is that you want to do and then to break it into chunks. So for us, going from college students without a farm to go back to, we knew we needed cows, we needed equipment, we needed land, and we needed a milking facility. And so with those sort of big chunks identified, we then sat down and basically built out a framework we used a framework for goal setting. You can use whatever framework you like. I know Cade really likes to work with SMART goals. I'm sure we're all familiar with them. What's really nice about SMART goals is that they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. But what's nice about them is it is something that you can set out to do and actually accomplish. I really like using a 5-year plan as a framework, and setting like near-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term being 5-year goals that support each other and work together. You can also use vision boards. You can do like a farm management plan. You can, however, whatever framework for goal setting works for you is the framework that you should use, but making sure that you're setting goals is key to actually achieving those big dreams. And so then once we have our goals sort of laid out, we then sit down and figure out what are the fundable bits. So there's lots of different projects that can be funded through grants. And there's lots of different projects that cannot be funded through grants. And so figuring out what you can ask for and what you can't ask for and where the support is really important. And having those goals and identifying different dependencies is also really important. So to go back to when we started out farming, we started on a rented farm. We bought our cows, we bought our equipment, we started milking, and then we were able to buy our farm in pretty short order once we had those cows and equipment lined up. If we had gone out and we had bought our farm first, we may not have been able to buy the cows and equipment because we would have been so cash strapped. And so making sure that you understand like what your goals are and what actions are dependent on which other actions is really important. And then once you have those dependencies laid out, you can figure out what are your fundable bits. So I'll talk about the different programs specifically later on in this presentation, but if you're looking to graze cows, frequently you can get funding for that from NRCS through EQIP or through your soil and water conservation district. You're also sometimes able to put watering systems in to support your grazing plan or improve a roadway or deal with conservation issues through those programs. If you're looking to really grow your direct to consumer marketing part of your business, something like the Value Added Producers Grant could be a really good fit for you. There's all these different programs that you can apply for, and so understanding what you're going after is really important to figuring out what makes sense to apply for. When we're going through a grant opportunity, the things that we look at are, do we have a project that we would like to do that fits within this funding opportunity? Mission creep can be deadly to a business. If you're chasing the money instead of finding money that aligns with your goals, all of a sudden you're going to wind up like somewhere out in left field doing something you didn't want to do, and maybe doing something that you're not able to fulfill because you were chasing the money. So you really have to make sure that you take your projects, you figure out what you want to get funded, and then you work to find the grants that will fund what it is that you want to do and not the other way around. And so then when we're looking at these fundable projects, the first thing we look at is, what impact is this going to have on our business? What's the return on investment? When we got the new farmer grant, we applied for a like the package of things we applied for included a major expansion of our cow barn, building out a heifer facility, and a mixer wagon. And a mixer wagon sounds like a really, really silly little thing. It cost a whole $5,000. But the return on investment for our mixer wagon was huge. It not only cut down the time that was required to feed the cows, it also improved the quality of the feed that the cows were getting because it was a TMR instead of just, hay and then silage and then corn or grain on top. And all of a sudden we saw that bump in milk production, and we're really able to see that return on investment on the mixer wagon really quickly. And then the other thing we look at is not just the financial side, but also what is the quality of life sort of return on investment. And for us, while we were able to raise heifers on our farm, putting in a heifer facility was really like such a huge quality of life bump for us that we felt that if we could find funding for it, it was worth going after it. And then as you're going after funding, another thing we look at is the ease of the application as well as the likelihood of receiving the award. Every application is different, but if it's going to take me 5 or 6 hours to put in an application and the grant is for maybe $500, I'm probably not going to prioritize that application. It's not going to be something I'm interested in. In my mind, that's a huge investment of time for something that may or may not happen. However, if I'm looking at applying for a grant for $250,000, let's say, and the application is going to take me 40 or 50 hours, while it's a significantly larger amount of time, it's also a significantly larger amount of money. And so when I do my risk reward analysis, if I feel like the project we're chasing is a good fit for that funding pool, I will go ahead and I'll take the time to put my application in. And then we also run through a what if analysis. We all have there's actual what if analyses that you can do in Excel that will give you like financial information. And we will do that. But then we also just allow ourselves to go through like the what if spiral. Like, what if we get this grant? What will happen? And make sure that the what ifs that come up are what ifs that we would actually like to pursue. Okay, so now that we have our fundable projects sort of broken out, how do we find the grants that fit? So USDA programs can be a huge source of funding. So there are a number of USDA programs. The two that we have participated with are EQIP and CSP. So CSP is the Conservation Stewardship Program. This is NRCS can explain it better, but CSP basically pays farmers to continue to do good practices and make them slightly better. For us, we participated early on the farm, and it was really nice to be acknowledged, acknowledged financially for the good that we were doing on the land. Since then we've also we've almost completed our first EQIP contract, and so EQIP projects are more focused on remediating a conservation concern. So in our case, we sit about halfway down a pretty massive hill. You can see in this picture, you can see what we call our flat field. And you can see that that's not very flat. We're just halfway down this really steep hill. And so we have all kinds of water problems, and we were able to use EQIP to put in a pretty significant drainage ditch. Ditch is a very small word to describe this really, really massive earthen structure, but it's significantly helped us manage our water issues, which has had huge implications for the quality of life for us, the quality of life for our animals, our feed management, all sorts of things. It's been really wonderful. Yeah, so EQIP can be a really great program to participate with. Both EQIP and CSP are pay for practice. So they pay you based on implementing the practice that you're implementing, and they have a calculator for how they calculate that cost. They are not like a grant in the traditional sense where you go to them with a project budget. They come to you and say, hey, we'll put your ditch in for X number of dollars, and then it's up to you to come up with the rest. Another really good source for funds, and also sort of the gatekeeper to a lot of the USDA programs, is FSA. So if you are going to participate with any NRCS programs, you have to make sure that you're in compliance with highly erodible lands. And there's like a sod buster and a wetland provision as well that you have to be in compliance with, and FSA keeps track of those records. And sometimes, depending on what you're participating in, you also need to have like farm field and tract information available. And so FSA is like the record keeper. And so making sure you have your farm established with FSA is critical. FSA also can offer loans. So during COVID, they had can also offer grants during COVID. They had some funds that came out. Specialty crop growers were just eligible for a small round of funds, I think, that were due at the beginning of January. And so staying in touch with FSA can be really, really good for identifying those small sort of grant opportunities. And then they also offer insurance products and loans, like the farm storage facility loan, or loans that help you like buy a farm. Also within USDA is rural development. They offer the value added producers grant. For those of you looking at marketing a value added product, the value added producers grant can be a really great opportunity to grow your market share. And then they also offer REAP, which is Rural Energy for American People, which can help cost share the installation of different kinds of energy infrastructure. And then I think the SBA is also within USDA. And even if they're not, they're a really great resource for business planning, for development, and even sometimes for loans. There's other sources of funding, and these other sources of funding may become more important as we go forward. I don't know. Ag and Markets typically has some amount of funding open. And so right now, the Regional Food Systems Infrastructure Grant just closed, I think, this past spring. There's grown and certified funding available for farms who are grown and certified or who are looking to become grown and certified. And then I believe the Beginning Farmer RFP is also available. And those are all grants that are through Ag and Markets and administered by different administrative partners. And then there's also your County Soil and Water Conservation District. I potentially may be the most annoying person at our USDA who like shows up at our USDA office because I will with some frequency ask about different grant opportunities and ask what fits. There are different pots of money that your soil and water conservation district can apply for on your behalf, and so making sure that they know what you're interested in, what your conservation concerns are, and how you guys can work together is really important. And they're also able to leverage funds in a different way. We had a barn fire shortly after we moved to our farm, and we had animals coming. Our cows were set to be delivered that week, and we had no place to put them because we didn't have a barn. And our soil and water conservation district, their grazing specialist, like came out and magicked fence into existence for us, as well as some like water lines. And so, I mean, and I don't know that we would be there without that initial infusion of a couple acres of fencing. And so making sure you're on really good terms with them, knowing what's up is really important. And then there's also other entities. Northeast SARE offers a really cool farmer grant. They just increased the funding threshold for that. And so if you're looking to cost share a cool thing you want to do that you're not sure if it's going to work, you can put in a farmer grant and it helps sort of mitigate the risk. So if you want to try some novel conservation practice that if it fails is going to be problematic, being able to do a little research and like use research funds to do research in real life is really cool. And then there's always like community development organizations that are looking to fund local businesses. Because keep in mind, like, yes, we are farms and there's a lot of farm specific funding, but we are also businesses and there's a lot of business funding. So in addition to grants, something that's really has been helpful for us is taking advantage of training and development programs. We've participated in various programs with CADE. I took part in the Small Business Administration offers an emerging leaders cohort that I participated in. I've taken classes at Cooperative Extension, all sorts of places. So taking advantage of what's out there is really just sort of a critical piece of being ready for these grants. And through these programs, like we've been able to develop our business management skills, and our writing skills, and grant writing itself has been an opportunity to learn how to temper my optimism, which is also a skill. It can feel, when you write a grant, I say this to my kids all the time, but when you're doing something new, and you can see my 10-year-old helping my husband fix the tractor, but when you're doing something new and it's something hard and it's maybe a little bit scary, it can be really easy to either give up or to become so enmeshed with this project that you don't know how to detangle yourself. And taking a step back and realizing that grant writing is really just a cool learning and growing opportunity really helps to take the sting out if you don't get the grant, and also to keep you humble if you do get the grant. So if you think about like what skills you're building as you're writing the grant, as well as the fact that you could potentially get funding for a project, I think it's a good medium. While you're writing a grant, there's documents that you definitely want to have updated. Sometimes application deadlines sneak up. Maybe you didn't see the RFP when it first came out. Maybe you got busy because farming is busy. But having a business plan and somewhat up-to-date financial benchmarks is really important. Being able to just pull those documents out and say, yup, I have many of the building blocks that I need to write this grant are really important. Instead of having to redevelop or instead of having to develop them from scratch each time. Additionally, and this isn't necessarily grant specific in the farming world, but it is, I think, just an important document, loose document to have. Having an elevator pitch like ready to go is so important. I realize like most of us don't go in elevators anymore. The last time I was in an elevator, I got stuck in one. But being able to very, very concisely share what it is that you do, why it's interesting, and what your like big dream is really has a way of forcing serendipity to happen. And so being prepared when somebody says, hey, what do you do? Instead of just saying like, oh, I milk cows, being prepared with what's your big dream, what excites you, is really important. And it also helps invigorate like your grant application as you're writing it. Okay, so what are the mechanics of writing a grant? So I'm not going to go into the specifics of specific RFPs, because that is better left to the people who are like administering the grant, and the specifics of an RFP will change year to year. But the big piece, be persistent. Most grants run year after year. I have a couple asterisks after that, but if you look at the history of EQIP or the Value Added Producers Grant, or the Beginning Farmer Grant, most of these grants come back again and again. And so if you apply for a grant and you don't make it, for whatever reason, you fall below the threshold of concern, or you don't score enough points to get the funding, ask for and integrate that feedback. I have consistently found that everybody I've reached out for feedback on grants that we've not been successful on has been more than happy to share what it is that we can do better next time. And then once you get that feedback, integrate it, and don't just integrate it into the same grant again next year, but integrate it into any grant you applied for in the future, so long as it's not program specific. And all of a sudden you wind up with a better package. You're better able to answer the questions. You're better able to refine your goals. You're better able to write a successful application. It's also really important not to take anything personally, and to remember that if you apply and get a no, it's not about you. It's not that your project's no good. It's not that you're a bad writer. It's that somebody else either had a larger resource concern, or somebody else wrote a slightly more compelling project. So don't take anything personally. Just apply again next year and keep trying to compete against yourself. That being said, don't reinvent the wheel. It is 1,000% okay to plagiarize yourself. There are many things about our businesses that don't change. Our goals might evolve over time. But chances are, if I'm a dairy farmer, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and say, actually, I'd like to farm emus. I'm probably still going to be a dairy farmer, and my business goals are going to stay the same. The components of my business are going to stay the same. And so you can recycle those bits both between year to year from in the same grant, and also between different grants. I keep a working document of language that I'm proud of. Writing grants is a lot of work, and it's a lot of like thought work and figuring out how to put the vision you can so clearly see in your head into words that the reviewer can read and then see that same vision. And so there's a lot of editing again. James helped me through the Value Added Producer Grant. I think both the first and second year we applied, and I think he can attest to the fact that there's just a lot of editing that goes on, and just honing of language. And if you come up with some sentences or some phrases or some paragraphs that you really like, throw them in a document, because you can probably break them out again. And if nothing else, it'll help jog. If you're feeling stuck, reading through that document might help jog some ideas. We do live in the world of AI. If you are using AI, remember that it's your first or second step. AI can help you get unstuck. It can help you figure out how to start writing about what it is that you want to write about. But AI can't give you the project idea, and AI is definitely not the last step. You want to make sure that once you do whatever you're doing with AI, you then sit down and read it and make sure that it accurately reflects what it is that you want to say, and also that it sounds like you. The most compelling thing is your voice. And so being able to actively share your voice and your farm story in your grant application is really important, and AI can't do that for you. Building relationships is also important. Depending on the grant, some grants require that you get bids from at least 3 contractors. And having relationships with contractors is really important when you have 2 weeks and you need to get those 3 bids lined up quickly, and you don't even know if you're going to be able to proceed with that work. Similarly, having relationships with business advisors has been really instrumental to us. Our relationship with Cade really really accelerated our growth trajectory, and changed the type of farming that we do. We've also worked with the Small Business Administration, the Partnership for Community Development in Hamilton, our cooperative extension, and all these people, honestly, and our dairy nutritionist, and all these business advisors have helped shape us to be the farm that we are. And it's also really important to build relationships with other farmers and dreamers. There's so much that we do every day on a farm that is impossible, that people looking from the outside are like, how do you do that? Why do you do that? And making sure that you have those relationships with like-minded people is just such an important part of like being successful and continuing to strive and to dream when things seem hard. As you're applying for the grant, the details matter. This is where you want to read that RFP. An RFP is a request for proposal really, really carefully. The RFP is going to lay out what type of program it is. Is it pay for practice? Is it paid off of a budget? Are 3 quotes required for the program? Those sorts of things. It'll also walk you through match. So is a match required? So like, do you have to put money in order to get money out? What documentation of the match is required? Do you have to show that you have the money in a bank or a letter of commitment from a loan officer before you can apply? And then are fringe and indirect costs allowed? So if you have salary built into your grant application, fringe is basically the other stuff that goes along with hiring people. So like your unemployment, taxes, those kinds of stuff, the other costs associated with salary. And then your indirect is just a flat rate. It's 15% that you can apply for on top of your direct project costs. So look at the RFP, see if those things are in there. Okay, so I'm going to go really quickly because I think I have like 5 more minutes. Once you get an award letter, what do you do? So for us, we've gotten to this point on a couple different grants. We've evaluated the opportunity for
Sarah, really quick.
Yeah.
I totally misconstrued the time. You have until 8:15, and then we'll go into Q&A. So you still have 30 minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay, I will stop talking so quickly. Um, okay, cool. So I will. Did anybody have any questions on that first piece? Okay, I will continue unless anybody flags me down. Okay, so once you get an award letter In the grant application process, you apply for a grant, you apply to a program, and then you're given an award letter. The award letter says, well, if you're successful, the award letter says, congratulations, we would like to have you participate in our program. And it outlines like what your responsibilities are and what the grantor's responsibilities are. So it might lay out the amount of money, the match, the timing on reimbursement, the like project reporting, all sorts of stuff. That all happens in the award letter. And we've gotten to this point most of the time. If I put the work into writing a grant and applying for the grant, we'll get to this point. If we get a yes and we get an award letter, most likely we're going to say yes. But there have been a couple times where we've sat down, really done our due diligence, and said, no, this opportunity is not for us. So how do we do that? Honestly, it's really hard. Saying no to an opportunity is just as important as saying yes. But saying yes always feels a whole lot better than saying no. So, right, my husband and I were the two that own this farm. Our kids are now a little bit older than they were in that picture, so sometimes they're involved in these conversations. But we'll sit down, and the first thing we ask ourselves is, do we have the financial capacity? Is the match something that we can float? If sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes the answer is kind of, but only if these other pieces fall into line. And sometimes the answer is an enthusiastic yes, the match is realistic, we can do this. And then, do we have the financing to bridge the gap if the project is reimbursement based? So a lot of times projects will be reimbursement based, which means you have to do the work and potentially pay for that work before you'll see the money back. For our equip contract where we put the ditch in, so equip isn't reimbursement necessarily because it's pay for practice. But for equip project where we put the ditch in, as beginning farmers, because we were still beginning farmers then, we were able to qualify for a 50% disbursement upfront. And so with those funds, we were able to go to our contractors, we were able to provide down payments. And then we worked, and this goes back to the relationship bit. We were able to work individually with them to either do assignment of payment. So once the work was complete, they would receive the rest of their payment once NRCS approved the practice, or to negotiate payment terms that were more reasonable. So our contractors weren't floating a huge amount of, let's say, payroll. And we weren't, getting assessed interest charges because sometimes you don't get reimbursed super timely. When we did the beginning farmer grant back in 2015, this looked like we worked with Farm Credit. They were able to provide us with a construction loan for the full amount of the project. And then we had a balloon payment basically when we got reimbursed on the funding. And so we were able to work out financing that made sense. So really understanding when you get that award letter, if you have the financial capacity is really important. In addition to finances, having the time is equally as important. There is a significant administrative burden in grants. There is also just the time required to oversee a project and do the project management of it. We said no to a grant 4 years ago because I was pregnant with our third, and I knew that the timing on it just was not, I didn't have the capacity to have a newborn baby and do the project management at the same time. Was it disappointing to say no? Absolutely. In retrospect, am I really glad that we decided we didn't have the capacity? Yes, I am. And then also, does the project as funded align with your farm goals? This is really important and goes back to both your big dreams as well as your SMART goals. Businesses change, and that is okay. And sometimes in the process of writing an application or in the process of an award letter, macro factors in the world or maybe factors on the farm have changed, and all of a sudden you're not looking for funding to whatever, put up a grazing system. Instead, you're looking for funding to put in a vegetable stand. I don't know. But it's okay if your farm goals change and you decide that the award letter just isn't a good fit for you. And typically, if you go back to the funder and say, hey, thanks, we appreciate it. At this time, we can't, they'll just be glad that you said no up front and didn't like end up in a mess. Okay, so I alluded to project management before. And project management is a huge component of successful grant management. And I don't know about you guys, but I would much rather be milking cows or feeding pigs or hanging out in the barn this time of night than I would sitting in front of my computer, like doing my taxes or sending emails or doing any kind of paperwork. However, if you don't do your paperwork, it's really, really hard to manage grants properly. And so I'm going to talk about sort of how we create a timeline, keep track of our expenses, and close out the grants. So for us, we have done project management in a bunch of different ways. There's project management software. We tend to use Notion on our farm. I also really like TickTick as a to-do list app because it allows for like really basic Gantt chart creation. There's also Asana. You can Google it. There's all kinds of project management softwares out there. You can also use paper, pencil, or a whiteboard. So this is the cow barn that we built with our beginning farmer grant in 2015. And I managed that entire grant out of a whiteboard and a notebook. And was it as convenient as having all the information on my phone? Absolutely not. But it was also 2015 and it worked perfectly fine. Google Drive can also be another good place if you're looking for file storage. You can build Gantt charts in Excel. You can assign tasks and have them show up on your calendar. Really just sitting down and figuring out how you want to manage the project and thinking about what works for you, what works for if you're farming with a partner, what works for them, and how you're going to be successful is really important. You also want to think about when you're applying for a grant and you put together this like aspirational timeline, and all your supplies show up on time, under budget. It never rains while you're trying to pour concrete. Let's see, family emergencies don't happen. You don't accidentally like gouge your arm while you're trying to finish the plumbing on your milk house, like all of the things. But the reality is supplies and materials get delayed. There's always going to be some sort of supply chain nonsense, and you're going to have to swap materials for different materials. Emergencies happen, family emergencies happen. We're human. And all of a sudden our timelines go out the window. And so as you're sitting down in that time between your award letter and obligating on a contract, it's really important to take a little bit and figure out, okay, what's your alternative plan? What's your plan B? If we can't get the sheet metal we want for the barn, could we build our barns in a different color? Would that be okay? Sometimes the answer might be no, and that's totally fine. But knowing which pieces are negotiable, both to yourself and also to the grantor, and knowing what pieces are non-negotiable is really, really important so that when you get down the road and you're in the middle of those problems, they're just problems. They're not catastrophes, and you can feel confident in your plan to deal with them. And then keeping track of grant-related expenses. So when you receive either your award letter or when you obligate on a grant, the grantor will share with you what information they need in order for you to get reimbursed. Frequently, this looks like saving your receipts. It might look like having really detailed invoices. So maybe it's not enough to have a contractor say, I dug a ditch. Maybe they have to say the dimensions of the ditch and the materials that were used in the bottom of the ditch and the number of man hours and the number of machine hours and all of those details. So getting really clear at the beginning about the information that's needed in order to get reimbursement is really important. It's also really important to tag expenses to a project in whatever accounting software you're using. You can do this in QuickBooks. We use Ambrook. Ambrook is a kinder and gentler QuickBooks that's like built for farmers, and I really like it because I can take a picture of the receipt on my phone. I can tag it. I can tag it to a project. I can tag it to an enterprise. I can do all sorts of tagging right there. And then when I have to go and I have to submit for reimbursement on a specific program, I can just pull up that project and all of my documents are right there. I also tend to take pictures. So this is going to sound really silly. But early on when we were farming, I don't even think it was for a grant. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we ended up in this, we were getting reimbursed for the concrete that we had poured. And it was like, oh, well, if it had been 6 inches of concrete, I'm making up numbers at this point, it would have been fine. But if it was 4 inches of concrete, it wouldn't have been fine. And whomever came and looked at it was like, this is definitely 4 inches of concrete. And I was able to use a picture that I'd happened to take of one of my daughters standing next to the concrete forms to be like, no, like, actually, this is 6 inches of concrete. Like, this was correct. And so after that experience, we've really just worked hard to make sure that as we're implementing a project, we're taking pictures all through the process, both pictures specifically to document. So pull out your tape measure, pull out your laser, whatever you need to do. And also just pictures of the process. Sometimes grantors really like to have success stories. And so having those pictures make the success stories more compelling for them. Consistently communicating with a grantor is key. Right? There's going to be a problem somewhere. You're going to have your supply chain issues, or the weather is going to do something, or whatever is going to happen. And making sure that you have like clear, open communication really helps when you do hit those snags, because you've established a relationship already, like a working relationship already, and you know how to talk to them about what is going on, and they also have a better sense of what is going on with your project. So you're not just going to them with problems, you're going to them pretty consistently, and sharing your progress. And then finally, when the work is done, just close out the grant. Some grants are absolutely a bear to close out. You might have a final report to submit. That final report may have some really specific requirements that maybe you forgot about and are now trying to like go back in time and find that picture or find that documentation. And it can be really hard to close out a grant. But it is always better to close that grant out than it is to just like let it keep hanging out and being a problem for another day. And closing out the grant is really important because it then opens the door for another grant. Sometimes participating in a program is predicated on being done with another program. Sometimes you can't participate in the same pool of funding like twice if you have one of your if you're open on your first project. So really just sitting down and being like, yes, I've built that building, I've marketed my product in a new area, I've installed my sign, whatever the grant is, like getting it closed, getting it done, do the thing, and then do the paperwork, and then move on with your life. Yeah, so thank you guys. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Sarah.
You
What
are welcome.
a
Hi.
great.
I have a question.
Sure, Nadia, go for it.
Hi, my name is Nadia, and I have a cashmere goat farm in South New Berlin. And I was so enthralled by your example of the slope, and how you said that NRCS, that equip program helped you install drainage. And so I want to know, what do you think led to them offering that kind of support? Because I have had NRCS come to my property, and we have a very similar situation going on, and they looked at our property to see if there was wetlands. They saw that there is drainage issues, and they just like did not offer. Like, we had 2 engineers come, they didn't offer anything. So and I even went to the office. So I feel like I am approaching, like, I know these programs are out there, but when I approach these agencies, maybe I'm not saying the magic words, maybe I'm not putting in the right inputs, but I feel like I'm attempting to engage with them and see what funding there might be available to fix my situation, but they're not giving me like any of this that other people say is available. And so I'm just wondering, what do you think? What were the magic words? What do you think were the ingredients that you had that led to them releasing the money and be like, yes, we can do this for you?
Um, I think that it was a war of attrition on my part. So we first started applying to Equip in 2012, when we had a purchase order in on this farm, but we hadn't yet bought it. We finally completed our ditch project in November of 2023. Um, and so we almost missed our beginning farmer threshold. We were, I think, 3 days short of no longer being beginning farmers when we obligated on the contract. It was a lot of hearing no, knowing that I had water issues. Every time our barn flooded, I'd send pictures to Soil and Water, and I'd send pictures to our NRCS guy. It was really just a lot of persistence. And I think I NRCS is really, I think, understaffed. They have a lot of really good programs, and I just don't think they have the staff necessarily to move it. And so I think a lot of it is just like being patient, which is awful. I understand, like, I get your water issues. It's awful, but just being patient, continuing to work with them, and just reminding them that you exist.
Yes. Does it help to have already a list of programs and ask them proactively, like, hey, I'm interested in this, this, and this, as opposed to like going to them and be like, hey, I have this problem. Can you give me some programs that might be able to help? Like, kind of come with the answers already.
I think that sounds like a really good strategy, being proactive and demonstrating how your resource concern meets their threshold definitely wouldn't hurt.
Okay.
Can I say something about this? So
Yes.
we tried to work with NRCS and had the same situation. We don't even have an NRCS person in our county, but then we went to Soil and Water Conservation District, and it was a totally different vibe. And they came out to the farm, they looked around, and we asked them to come out for one thing, and we left with ideas about 3 other things. They were very enthusiastic, almost as if, I don't know if they have a different mission than NRCS, but Soil and Water has saved our lives a number of times.
Oh, good to know.
And Soil and Water and NRCS can work hand in hand. Bill, that's like a great point. So NRCS was able to fund like half of our ditch, which is great. Like, half of a ditch is better than no ditch. But we're able to work with Soil and Water to fund basically the roadway and like the rest of the ditch. And I can't even imagine what this summer is going to look like when we get thunderstorms. It's going to be amazing. There's not going to be water anywhere it doesn't belong. And so figuring out um, how to work with the different agencies like together, I think, is important. And a lot of times Soil and Water and NRCS, they're used to partnering on projects. So yeah, maybe Soil and Water could be more helpful to you.
All
Something
right,
that I could add to that too is that your local office is where you should go first However, you are not obligated to work with your county office. You are allowed to reach out to another county's office if your office is understaffed or not being responsive. And it really can vary from county to county what those individuals are like. And, like Sarah said, it's not so much that like some people are horrible and mean and some people are nice and helpful. It's like understaffing mostly. So yeah, Nadia, I've had a great experience with the Delaware County NRCS and Soil and Water folks. So do reach out to them if your people in Otsego are not being super responsive.
It was so funny because I was just thinking the Delaware County people have their stuff together. And so yeah, it's good that you mentioned it. That's true.
I can vouch that I can vouch that on the east or on the west side of New York and Rochester, Livingston County is really great. I know Monroe County can be difficult to work with just because, again, understaffing issues. So Livingston County is really great if you're near there.
Ah, thank you.
Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm just absolutely amazed at the amount of programs that are available, specifically through NRCS. I'm in Shenango County, and so we had a guy we tried a couple years ago, and I had my 5-year plan. These are all the projects we're looking at with regards to water, creeks through the farm and such. After a lunch and going through the farm and showing him everything, he went back down close to his car. He got out of the Kubota, handed me a pamphlet, and said, good luck with that. And I was like,
And I went to the Shenango County office in Norwich and same thing similar experience.
right.
Never down.
So I'll try again because this guy is retired. And I think he retired years ago, just nobody told him. And but I'll try again because the programs that you mentioned, I mean, they're all applicable to, what we're trying to accomplish. But, the idea is there's so much available, it's hard to know, where to go. But if you can go to these agencies, and I've just worked with FSA on helping us fund a walk-in freezer on our farm. So it wasn't a grant, it's a 5-year loan at a, very low interest rate. We had to put the money out, and then they went and, they reimbursed us. It was great. It was very easy. The guys there in Shenango on the FSA, fantastic. But, to hear about these other programs that are available, then we're still building after, 8 years. So that, I'll certainly try again, and I thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So Chris, you asked, do you need a CNMP for EQIP? So a CNMP is a comprehensive nutrient management plan. I don't know if you still need a CNMP for EQIP. When we were in probably the first 5 years of applying for EQIP, they required a CNMP. However, sometimes NRCS will have, and this Ed might help you as well, and Nadia as well. They'll require that you do a thing. In this case, it was get a CNMP, but they will provide a small amount of funding. And so in our case, it was $5,000 to get somebody to write that CNMP. There's also some other hoops sometimes that require funding as well. I don't know if they're still applying for it, but if that is the barrier to being able to get your EQIP funds, sometimes your county office can help with that. And for CNMP specifically, oh gosh, I feel like it's a program out of, I want to say Pro Dairy at Cornell, but you can apply for like $3,000 for a nutrient management plan. And so sometimes like you just got to Google what you want, and sometimes Google will give you good answers. Maria, you asked about the beginning farmer grant. So I believe the beginning farmer grant is being administered by New York Farm Viability. or never mind, James answered that question. It just wrapped up, but it'll happen next year. But there's also a Grown and Certified grant that is being administered through New York Farm Viability. And so if you go to their website, it will have more information, as well as the application will be there. And I believe also that county cooperative extension offices are being tasked with supporting farmers and writing those grants. And so you might just want to get to know your county extension person and have them keep you in mind.
And hopefully the next year or two of funding for that program will be a much larger pot. This round of funding was quite small.
Yeah.
Sarah, can I ask you to share? Oh, James, were you going to say something on that?
The land project grant is still open though. That one's for socially and economically disadvantaged farmers, and that's through NEFOC. So if you went to, I think it's NewYorkLandProject.org, I think, that website. They're just on tier 1 right now, and they're offering 4 tiers. So they're just kind of starting off that grant. And I don't think they've said yet when the next tiers are opening up. So there is still time for that portion of the same pot of funds that came from Ag and Markets.
Sarah, I was going to ask if you could share about your VAPG project scope, like what you had included in that project.
Yes, so we are still working on our value-added producers grant project, and perhaps that last slide was more geared to myself, so I actually tie up my project than to anybody else. But for that project, take a step back. So Chris and I, my husband and I, started a dairy farm in 2012 and almost immediately discovered that people really, really like to buy meat. And so we started with fax machines and mailed like pamphlets to people in New York City, and started basically a direct to consumer meat beef business, and I would drive your steak to your house in Queens. Our business evolved. We now ship our beef all over the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and Midwest. And we applied for a value-added producers grant unsuccessfully in 2022, maybe 2021, I don't remember, to help us basically expand our market in a more deliberate way into Westchester County. We had seen a lot of growth on Long Island. We'd seen a lot of growth in the city. We'd seen some growth in Westchester, but not really, and really wanted to crack that market. We applied, we weren't successful. And so then we applied again. The first year for the value-added producer grant, it probably took, James probably knows better than I do, but it probably took northward of 70 hours of work to put that application in. Maybe more than that. The second year, I used the feedback that we got, figured out where we'd fallen short, worked with James again, and we were able to put in a very similar proposal that got funded. And so we have been pretty successfully breaking into the Westchester market. We were able to work with a consultant to nail down some of our branding, to identify like what kinds of branded collateral are good for marketing and what kinds of branded collateral really don't yield any return on investment. The really nice thing about it being a grant is that even though there's a match, so we're at a 50% match with the value-added producers grant, we're able to kind of make mistakes in a subsidized way. So we discovered after buying 100 t-shirts that people are not really into t-shirts. Everybody says they love a t-shirt, but they don't actually love a t-shirt. And it's not a great way to market. And we got like 0 return on investment. Insulated tote bags, people go crazy for. And that has been, from a marketing perspective, because we can like track that on the website, that has been a really good source of marketing for us. And so what the value added producers grant did for us was it kind of gave us training wheels to break into a new market, and then to take what we learned from breaking into that new market and then basically build out a marketing plan to replicate that in other places. Yeah, everybody gets t-shirts for free. They still don't want t-shirts. They're still like, oh, I love this. I'm never going to wear it. It's going to go die in the bottom of my drawer. But insulated totes people bring to the supermarket.
James was good to remember to put the webinar evaluation in the chat. If everybody could take a minute before you head out tonight to complete that, we would greatly appreciate it. I'm sure other folks have questions though. What are you wondering about?
Sarah, just a quick question. You mentioned consultants. Where can you find consultants that will help guide you through the grant process and are familiar with the grants that might be available and direct you to the right ones based on what your plans are?
Okay, so I am really leery of consultants for grants. I have never paid anybody to help me to apply for anything. That's just my own personal preference. There are Cade is really good about sharing grants as they become available. Subscribing to their newsletter is invaluable. Your local county office, county extension office can be a good source of grants when they become available. And depending on your county extension office or other Cade or other organizations like that, sometimes there will be free help available to help you apply for grants. In terms of how do you find a contractor once you've, or a subcontractor once you've received the grant, for us it's depended. So for physically building stuff, we bumbled around for probably the first 3 years of farming until we found the contractors we prefer to work with and build stuff. So for us, it was trial and error. For marketing work, I think you have to be really careful. And something that I've learned is that basically hire slowly, fire quickly. So take your time making sure that the person you're working with is a good fit. And then if something goes off the rails, like nip it in the bud. Just don't hope it's going to get better, because it probably won't. And so I think like doing due diligence, whether that's with like your trusted nonprofit, helping you find good matches. I think like Cade is a really good place to start in terms of identifying good resources. Yep, New York FarmNet is fantastic. I cannot say enough good things about New York FarmNet. Emily, like, thank you for bringing them up. They have business consultants, they have social workers, they have financial consultants, they have all kinds of people there. And they are great, and they answer their phone and they come to your house. Yeah. Rachel, you say grants and taxes. Are you asking how those two work together? I'm going to assume that's what you're asking. So grants are considered taxable income. So grants are considered taxable income. And so work with your accountant. I am a farmer, not an accountant. But you want to make sure that, to the best of your ability, that the year that you receive the grant funding is also the year that you incur the expenses against that grant funding. So you don't want to see, if you're getting an advance on something, you don't want to see that advance in 2024 and then all your expenses in 2025, because it'll mess with your taxes or vice versa.
Just scrolling back up through to see if anybody's comments from earlier use an answer.
I'm happy to talk about grant budgets if that would be interesting to people.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, James put together a template that we can share with everybody after this session, and maybe James, if you want to, okay, so yeah, you just shared it in the chat. I was going to say we could maybe even share your screen and walk through it.
Yeah, yeah, yep. And
You
let's
can
see.
see, wow, so many people hopping into the document too. So
me- There we go. Yeah, the budget aspect, very, very simplified version. So I'll probably let Sarah get a little bit more specific about the budget part, but this spreadsheet, this spreadsheet just has a couple of handy tools in it that could be useful for your planning of grants. Specifically, like the SMART goal, I always find really helpful for folks to have a really good goal in mind and really having a clear understanding of what it is that they're looking to achieve and have as outcomes. And part of that is, having a clear picture of what your financials are so that you can really paint a really solid financial picture and demonstrate to the grantors, what their return on investment might look like. So that's what this first tab is. The summary budget here, some of you might recognize from the beginning farmer grant that just wrapped up. I just kind of borrowed the scheme of it because I really liked how simplistic their budget was. Not all grant budgets are going to be this simple, but this again just gives you a really maybe simple way to play around with how a grant budget might look, especially with the matching percentage. That can get a little bit confusing. Like if you look here, this is like $100,000 project, but it's an $80,000 grant award. So the 25% is 25% of the grant award, not 25% of the total project. So it can be a helpful little calculator if you're getting confused with the percentages there. And then just a simple little Gantt chart here for project management. And then a little more complex Gantt chart here. Yeah, if you guys are interested in this, you can click the file button up here, make a copy, and then you can download it to your own Google Drive that way. But yeah, Sarah, do you have more you want to jump into about budgets?
Yeah, so this is amazing, James. Like I might go steal it from you. But this is exactly the way to do it. You want to work out a high level summary budget, and then if you're working with smaller pieces, so for our beginning farmer grant, we built a heifer facility, a cow barn, and bought a mixer wagon. And we knew what our budget had to be, the big number. And then we had to play around with different budget categories and different costs. And so you'll want to break out, for instance, like we would have written down cow barn, materials would have been whatever, $20,000. Labor would have been, well, labor ended up being free, but you'd want to make sure you had all the pieces. That way, if you need to cut from your budget someplace or you need to add to your budget someplace, you can trace those changes all the way along. And what I do is I build my budget for a grant in Excel first. Then I dump it into my Word document, like type up my application, explain what each budget section is going to do. And then I go back and I make sure that my numbers in my narrative match the numbers on my spreadsheet. The worst thing in the world is to try to do this like on a sheet of paper next to you or like live in your application budget, because you won't like necessarily remember all the numbers and the assumptions that are going into your budget. So spreadsheets are the way to go.
I'm glad we had so much time for questions at the end. Like I said, we'll definitely share out this template along with the recording. We have a helpful handout on SMART goals. Anybody else have other questions? Nadia, you came off mute.
Oh, sorry. No, I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, cool. Great. Well, we can, yeah, leave it there. And thank you all so much for coming to our first webinar of the season. This has been fun. Sarah, you want to say anything to wrap up?
Thank you guys. This was great.
Cool.
One last question.
Sure.
How much snow are we going to get tonight?
Too much.
My weather says that it's not going to be snowing, and then all of a sudden we're going to be getting like a 3/4 of an inch an hour. So maybe it'll
I've
come.
heard 5 to 10 inches. We're in Norwich, so 5 to 10 in Norwich.
Nice. Cool. Well, I hope everybody can stay safe and cozy at home during the snow, and do apply for the Beginning Farmer Boost program, and definitely send James and I any questions if you have them about that. And I hope to see you in our next webinar. We're going to be with Wholehearted Bookkeeping Cooperative, which is a worker-owned cooperative of bookkeepers based. I guess they're remote. They're all over, but they're going to talk specifically about how to do tax planning to make sure that as you're paying yourself as an LLC owner or a sole proprietor, that you are planning ahead so that you're not surprised by the tax burden at the end of the year. So hope to see you there. And in our later webinars with Robert Haddad talking about all of the wild FSMA updates, the Food Safety Modernization Act that nobody seems to know what's actually going on with. So thanks for spending an hour and a half with us tonight, folks. We'll see you soon.